that all rights are reserved for the information that you're seeing in this PowerPoint. If you want to use it for something to talk to other folks about, i.e. you want to take a part of this presentation and use it for your own benefit, please reach out to me and we can talk about the best way for us to share this work with those around you. So let's hop right in. As I said before, I think it's time for us to rethink our approach to leadership. I've studied under some of the best and brightest in leadership, and I'm personally informed a lot by the work of Ronald Heifetz in adaptive leadership. But a lot of the way we've looked at leadership in the past is a focus on practices. These are the 5 exemplary practices of leadership based on Cousins and Posner. This is what it means to be a servant leader. And so then we started to see an emergence of emotionally intelligent leadership. What does it mean? How does mindset influence leadership? And so what I want us to begin to think about in the future and now in the present is, how do we balance this discussion of being and doing? So when I show up in any given space as a professor, as a student, as a colleague in a meeting, I am bringing my being. I'm bringing my identity. I'm bringing also my emotions and my mindset. That is going to influence how I show up and exercise leadership. And so I wanted to get us to start to think about, how do we honor the complexity of our identity when we show up and the power that we have within our identity to shape how we experience any given moment. And I wanted to move us away from the deficit approach, which is, I believe that everyone has power and choice in every situation. We all have power and we all have choice. And so with that, leadership really is a way of life. It's not a one-time act. It's not something that I put on when I go to work or something that I put on when I teach a seminar. People are exercising leadership as parents. You're exercising leadership as a member of an organization. And I really believe that the practice of leadership, when connected with advancing equity, can truly transform our world. So let me hop right in. As with any person in education, you want to make sure that folks are grounded in the same terms. I realize that many of you on this webinar have read different things about what does it mean to exhibit leadership or what a leader is, but I want to ground you in the terms that are essential to this framework and what I'm talking about so that we can be on the same page. The first thing is that we all have power. I talked about this. And power comes from within, and we can choose to use our power in one of 2 ways. One way is we can choose to use it externally. That's when we give power to others to act on our behalf. So think about when you elect an official or when you vote for someone to be appointed to a role. You are granting someone authority in order to act on your behalf. You believe that there's a benefit, you like their philosophy aligns with yours, you're giving them power to act on your behalf. The second way that you can wield your power externally is to tie it to other people. So this is what happens when we sometimes find validation in things outside of us. This is really a misuse of power, because what happens is we begin to tie our value and our worth to something that's outside of us. So we see this happening when people are tied to titles, or you're tied to getting a promotion. And so then when you don't get the promotion, you don't feel like you're important. You don't feel like you're a valuable person. That in essence is you tying your value and your worth to something outside of you. You're giving something outside of you the decision or the ability to determine, how you feel about yourself. What I'm going to talk about today is your inner power. That is, how do you use your mindsets, emotions, and behaviors? And you can use them in one of 2 ways: towards trust and love, where you are trusting yourself, seeing that you are enough, which is the greatest act of love that leads you to the highest version of yourself. Or you can use it from a place of fear and doubt, where you're doubting yourself or instilling fear. Think about the last time you let fear and doubt guide your life. What happened? And we'll talk about that later, some of the emotions and behaviors. So I'm trying to move us towards using our power towards trust and love. The next thing I want to clarify, and I thank Ron Heifetz for really helping me to understand this, the difference between power and, leadership. So authority is just power given to someone to perform a service. There's 2 types of authority we all have. It's informal and formal. Let me talk about formal. Formal authority is power that has been granted to you, again, it's the external power, I just talked about this, to perform a particular role. When you got your job description at work, that was your organization giving you power to perform that service. The moment you are not performing that service up to their standards, they will politely ask you for that power back and you part from the organization. There's also a second way that you have authority, and that is informally. This is power, external power granted to someone because they have the ability to make things happen, regardless of the formal role. This is that person in the office that they may not have the highest title, but they're the go-to person. They're the person that makes things happen. And they have developed that level of authority. People give them a lot of power in the organization is because they have a history of being able to move things along. They have a history of performing a service, so people are willing to give them power outside of their authority. The one thing I really want to note here is that, you know, a part of conscious leadership is how you exercise leadership from your own personal lens. And I really want to encourage you to think about what are the bounds, what is the formal authority that's given to you in your job description. Because a lot of times we usurp or we give up the power to lead change, or we give up the power that's already granted to us in our job description. We give up that authority out of fear and out of doubt when those 12 bullets is what your organization has said, this is what I'm giving you power to do. Okay, you can tell I get a little excited about that. So let me backtrack. The last term here on this slide is leader. And leader is just, we're getting more and more narrow. Leader is essentially authority given to someone to perform a specific role. That is CEO, that is president, that is, you know, chief financial officer. Organization has given you authority to perform a role. It is not leadership. There's a difference between leadership and leader. Leader is just a person. We all know folks in our lives that they have a title as an appointed leader, and we know that they are not fully maximizing themselves in that role. So let's talk about conscious leadership. This is what we're going to spend the bulk of our time talking about. It's a way to exercise personal leadership. So again, I'm taking us back from focusing solely on other people to look at yourself. Thinking about how do you choose your mindsets, emotions, and behaviors that's going to lead you towards that trust and love. And that is guided by 4 practices, which I'm going to talk to you about: choice, presence, self-awareness, and intentionality. That's you, the sole person. When you move out and think about how do you exercise leadership with other people, okay? This is, first and foremost, leadership is not a one-time act, it's a way of life. It is a set of conscious practices, i.e. conscious leadership, for using your power to mobilize others to and through change. Let me explain that. The mobilization piece. Leadership with others is not about you being the sole person doing all the work. It's about bringing people together of differing perspectives. When I say to and through change, this is also based on a lot of the work that I have done and studying under Ron Heifetz, who was on my capstone dissertation committee and just doing a lot of adaptive leadership work, is that we lead people to change, but we don't lead them through it. And I know this is true because my entire professional career before I became an entrepreneur was the change agent. I was a person bought in to change, to create new departments, functional areas, strategies. I was a quintessential entrepreneur. And what happens is I learned a lot. I bumped my head, and I also had a lot of success. But when I say we lead people to and through, we say to people, we want you to now follow this new policy or this new process. But we don't lead them through the change. We don't talk about the loss that's associated with you asking someone to show up differently and behave differently when they have spent weeks, months, years behaving, acting in one other way. We don't talk about what does it mean for them to try to negotiate. How do you start to change your behavior? How is this impacting who you are? It is more of an empathizing approach to change. And it's also recognizing when you say to and through change, we want to bring people along with us and not isolate them. Now, that doesn't mean you stop moving an initiative forward if you have people that disagree with you, but it's a way that you nuance and navigate that situation. And I say change because leadership is all about pushing against the status quo. Think about the people we consider to be folks that have been transformative leaders in our lives and also in our country. They've been folks that's pushed the status quo. So that's getting us all on the same page. I'm not going to talk about exercising leadership with others. That's this webinar part 2. I'm going to focus on conscious leadership. Okay, as I said before, we have power and choice in every situation, and it truly is up to us to decide if we are going to use them. And the truth of the matter is that not choosing to use it is still a choice. And again, power, as I said before, is how you use your mindsets, your emotions, and your behaviors. And I talk to my coaching clients about this a lot and the students that I'm working with. You always have power. You always have choice. If you don't remember anything else I say today, I want you to remember that those are free 99, and we have access to them in every moment. So now let's get into the theory of it. So you ask yourself, if you have power and choice in every situation, you say, how do I want to use my power? Do I want to use it to trust myself and instill love? This is going towards the highest version of yourself. And I focus this on the inside, looking at you first, because a lot of us, because of our past experiences, working with other people, trust is a loaded word. That's another conversation when you start thinking about trusting others. So let's talk about yourself. When you decide to trust yourself, you see yourself from an asset lens. You see yourself as being enough. This is the best solution in the moment. That moment you start to see and trust yourself is instilling a level of love towards you, because you are honoring yourself, honoring your truth, honoring your abilities. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't seek skills and additional training. Of course, if you know yourself well enough, you'll know where you need to grow. But in this moment, you have a level of trust that you are enough, and this is the best solution in the moment. You then use that power to honor your truth and yourself. That's an act of love. And I'll talk about it later, how when you move from a place of trust and love in yourself, how that also trickles to other people. You can ask yourself, do I want to use my power to doubt myself and instill fear? When you make the choice to let fear be the guiding force in your mind, you are setting yourself up to use your power to torment you. Think about the last time you were driven by fear. There was probably a fixation on the past, and in future what ifs. It creates a level of circular thinking. It sends you in the downward spiral in the lower level of yourself, creating false scenarios. The only two fears we're born with are fear of falling and fear of loud noises, scientifically proven. Every other fear is something that we've learned, which means we can unlearn it. If you're thinking about, are you going to use your power to doubt yourself? This is when you are thinking, I am not enough. It leads you into this circular reasoning of worst case scenarios. Just think about the last time you used your power, your mindset, your behavior, and your emotions in either of those two ways. Now, I'm going to hop into what this actually looks like in practice, how they all tie together. But I'll share with you, people often say to me, Annice, well, I can't choose my mindset. I can't choose what popped into my head. And I'll say to them, you're right. That's biological. But I can choose how long I allow a thought to sit in my mind. I can choose whether or not I allow it to build a picket fence, a house, and a garden. I opt to, if that thought is based in fear, I'm going to process it, and then I want to evict it because I know what the consequence is going to be if I let it sit there. So let's start out. You think about, okay, you answer the question, I want to use my power towards trust and love. Think about the last time that you trusted yourself and you thought that you were enough. In your mindset, you were seeing yourself from an asset lens and from a courage. Now think about what you felt emotionally. When you see yourself as an asset, that gives a level of self-compassion, believing in yourself. Peace, sometimes it instills joy. It brings positive emotions, which then impacts your behaviors, prompting you to be able to be brave, exercise leadership. And I'll say this, your mindset connects to your emotions, connects to your behaviors. Let me give you an example. You wake up in the morning. If the first thing that pops in your mind when you wake up is, this is not going to be a good day, I overslept past my alarm clock, this is not going to be a good day, it's totally going to be frustrating, you're making scenarios, right, in your mind. That's not a place of like trusting yourself or loving yourself. What then's to happen? You maybe start feeling experiences of your emotions are not positive. They're probably sad, they're probably frustrated. And then how then does that impact your behaviors? How do you interact with your spouse, or how do you interact with the first person you see? Think about that. Those three things are always happening at every given time. So I just gave you an example of what that looks like from a fear and doubt. If you choose fear and doubt, think about the last time you chose to use your power for fear and doubt. Your mindset more than likely was one is that it was a deficit. I am not enough, or I don't have enough in this situation, which then triggers those emotions, which then leads to behaviors that are often unstable and promoting the status quo, which leaves us in a lesser version of ourselves. So what does this actually look like in practice? How can I take what Dr. Fisher has just said and put it into action? As I said before, it's guided by 4 practices. This philosophy, using your power and choice in every situation, is guided by choice, which we talked a lot about choice already. I'm going to talk to you about presence, self-awareness, and intentionality. So this is how it works. You ask yourself, how do I want to use my power? I have 3 times a day that I pause for meditation and reflection. And I ask myself every time, how do I want to use my power during that meditation? And I even ask myself that mentally as I'm moving throughout the day. You will notice a lot of what this philosophy is talking about is the process of slowing down and being more present, being more conscious with what's going on around you and what's going on inside of you. So you ask yourself, how do I want to use my power? If you're using it from a place of trust and love, the moment you ask that question, you are raising your consciousness to that loop that's happening inside of you, your mindset, your emotions, and your actions. You're already setting that in motion. By choosing to use it from a place of trust and love, as I said before, you're entering into an asset-based mindset right there that you're enough. You're honoring yourself and others. That's going to start channeling that self-compassion, which is what I said, it's going to prompt behaviors of bravery. If you don't believe me, test this out on yourself. Think about the last time you operated in trust and love. Let's look at it from a place of fear and doubt. How do I want to use my power? That's the choice part of it, right? That's the choice part of it. You get to choose. That starts to raise your consciousness on how your mindset is shaping your emotions and behaviors. That's the presence part of it. Because the moment you ask the question is the moment you start getting yourself in the present to start to think about what's going on inside of you and what's going on around you. That's creating the presence, slowing down. That presence moment is giving you a self-awareness. It's creating a level. You're not just moving through the world. Most of us are on the rat race, going. And I'm really on a mission for all of us to slow the rat race down. We don't have to move at the speed of lightning because everyone else moves at the speed of lightning. M.Ed talks about, in his article on transform nonconformity, he talks about being a thermostat versus a thermometer. A thermometer, think about it, it responds to the temperature of the room. You put a thermometer outside, it's going to tell you right now in Chicago it's 27 degrees. It's responding to the outside temperature. A thermostat sets the temperature in the room. The thermostat in my apartment is going to set the temperature in the room at 72, which means you are using your power to set the room, set the situation. Oftentimes when there's chaos all around you and someone has a calming presence to slow things around, they then begin to impact people around them. So you can slow things down. And this self-awareness is really important because the fact when you start asking yourself that question, you slow yourself down, you get a sense of what's going on around you, what's going on in the situation. You're building your self-awareness to be more intentional on how you want to behave. And you set it again in motion. If you're going to do it from the fear lens, which I hope you don't, but we're all human. And I want to say this, I'm not saying that we should be bionic human beings that do not have fear. That's not true. We all have fear and we all have doubts. What I'm saying is you don't have to sit in that. You have a personal choice is all I'm saying. So if you're operating from that fear place of I'm not enough, you'll start to feel the self-torment. Think about it. Those emotions of anxiety, right? If you're not present to know that it's anxiety and you can flip the switch away from anxiety, checking in with yourself is what would happen if you're using self-awareness. Checking in with yourself. Why am I feeling anxious about this situation? What am I not trusting about myself? But if you keep going and let anxiety rule you, you're going to more than likely lead to behaviors of instability. I'm not sure. You waver back and forth. What am I going to do? And it can prompt the status quo rather than being brave and bold. So I wanted to take some time to talk about what does this look like in practice, so you all don't think I'm just giving you something at 30,000 feet in the air. So how could this look in practice? Because it can be done. It doesn't take 12 hours to do this. So think about it as the situation of a supervisor. A supervisor wants to hold their staff accountable for submitting low quality work. Now, those of you all who manage people know this is a common thing that supervisors grapple with. And I believe, and I said before the evaluation period, because no one should ever find out at their evaluation that you think that they've submitted low quality work. They should know that beforehand. So then in this scenario, the supervisor would ask himself, okay, how do I want to use my power? I have to meet with Jenny. How do I want to use my power in this situation? Do I want to use it towards trust and love or fear and doubt? Okay. In this situation, the person is going to be having a difficult conversation with Jenny. So I'm going to trust. I'm going to choose trust and love, means I'm trusting that this is the conversation that I need to have. I have everything I need. I trust that this is the right move for me to make. That's also, in the same vein, instilling love to that colleague. And you ask how? What does that mean? If I am your supervisor and I consistently let you submit low quality work and I don't raise your awareness that this is impacting your practice, then I am not in any way helping with your development. I'm not living up to the authority that's been granted to me for my role. So me loving you is actually speaking truth. And this is where I want to crack the myth that love means that we don't have difficult conversations, or love means that we don't disagree. That's not true. Love actually means that we help other people grow by speaking the truth and being honest with them. So in this case, again, they're choosing to use their power and trust and love. Okay, so I need to have this conversation with Jenny. I'm going to use my power. I believe that this is the right conversation to have. I know that I trust that this is the right move. I trust my voice. I trust I have everything I need in the moment. If you don't have everything you need to pick up a skill. You learn how to have difficult conversations, whatever the case it may be. But in this moment, she's believing she has everything that she needs in this moment, creating a level of presence. Okay, so what's going on, the self-awareness? Okay, so what's going on in the actual scenario? What has happened with Jenny that has allowed me to believe that she has been submitting low quality work? So what are the specific examples of that? Okay, how am I feeling about having this difficult conversation? You got to know what's going on with you before you even sit across the table from somebody. Okay, now you have a complete awareness of the situation. How might Jenny respond? Okay, so then that taps into the intentionality. How do I want to approach Jenny in this conversation? Based on what you know about yourself, based on what you know about Jenny. That's how it looks in a supervisor context. In a peer context, it would be very similar with holding your peer accountable for pulling their weight on a project. How do you want to use your power and choice in this moment? If you are choosing, let me do it the opposite way. If you're choosing to use it towards fear and doubt, I'm just going to play that out too. These practices, obviously, I want you to use them for the highest level, but I just want to give you a sense of what it looks like when you use it from a place of fear and doubt. Well, if fear and doubt is your guiding force, there's probably going to be a level of doubt that you have. So it's like, I'm not sure I want to talk to this person about it. Now, you always have to think, if you're going to have a difficult conversation with someone, what is the best context to have that conversation? But if you're operating from a place of fear and doubt, there's going to be a lot of what ifs, circular reason, and you might doubt. I don't need to have this conversation. I don't want to have the conversation. Then what happens is that you're not, being present and honest and truthful to the moment at hand, which is a difficult conversation should be had because someone's not pulling their weight on the project. Right? And self-awareness, then it's like, are you checking in with yourself to discern what's behind the fear and doubt? What's behind the anxiety, the emotion of anxiety that's coming up for you? And how is that impacting your ability to be intentional and have that conversation with your colleague, i.e., how is that creating a moment where you're promoting the status quo? So I want to just talk a little bit about how can this work with equity. I wanted to separate the two out so that you can see what I'm talking about as how it can help us advance equity. They're very similar. So what is equity? I want to ground us with the same definition. This is what inequity is. You can see this comes from my own definition in Teachings for Diversity and Social Justice. I define inequity as fear-based, discriminatory acts against someone based on their identity. You can see the big 8 down there: race, gender, class. Those are the big 8 that we often talk about in equity work. But it also includes bias against other identities, such as people's size and skin tone, etc. It happens on 3 different levels: individually, culturally, and systemically. So what do I mean? Individually is one-to-one. I create a bias act against my colleague. Culturally, it happens when we see it happen culturally, that people will have code of conduct that says you can't wear braids or dreadlocks at work. That's a cultural bias. How is it cultural? Because it is basically taking a norm, a white standard norm about how hair should look, and it's now a policy. That also can be systemic. When I say systemic, that's the 3rd level. Systemic is when you think about the systems that we go through in life, through government, healthcare, the housing, justice system, when you enact acts at the system level. So I think we have a very strong understanding of what this looks like individually and systemically. I think culturally is where we get in trouble a little bit. And then it occurs both unintentionally and intentionally. Right? Unintentionally would be to offer an office lunch and unintentionally not ask people if they eat halal or kosher. Now, do I believe people in the office has intended to offend folks who eat kosher, halal, or gluten sensitivity? No, that's not intentional. But that's because we're assuming that everyone can eat everything. A more intentional way would be to ask. So what then does equity mean? Equity is different from equality because equality is fairness plus the same. Equity is fairness plus justice. So my definition of social justice is there. So I'll quote my master's advisor, Nancy Evans from Iowa State. Sometimes you have to do things that are unequal to achieve equity, because we're not all starting out with the same thing. That's where the justice comes in at. It's the disruption of yourself and other people from participating in these systems that are maintaining inequity and the status quo. So then how could this model help us rethink our approach to equity? 1, equity work is often disconnected from the task of leadership. We talk about equity as something separate. It's a set of 12 competencies that we're asking people to do in addition to their job versus building it into our entire organization. And we view it oftentimes from a deficit lens. And so equity is attached to leadership. It's about being conscious. I already talked about moving people to and through the change process. We come in and say, this is a new policy. We don't talk to people about what does this mean? What's the loss associated with it? If you do a lot of research as to why people resist diversity trainings and why people resist equity work, one of the number 1 reasons they resist it is because they're trying to figure out how to manage the loss that's associated with reconciling. I can love my mother, my grandfather, my rabbi, my preacher, my favorite talk show. However, that person, because I'm socialized by them, I've learned some things that are biased, that have some racist tendency or homophobic tendencies. And so people grapple with how do they reconcile the both and there. And that's what I mean when I say move people through the change. So sometimes when people are resisting it, they're not resisting it because they don't believe in equity. They're trying to figure out how to manage the loss, and we haven't given people the language to that. I believe 99.1% of the people in the world don't wake up and want to promote inequity, but we've been socialized. I do believe there are 0.9% of fringe groups that do that, but most people in the world don't do that. And if we start with that mindset, that can really help us to begin to think about how do we help them be more conscious. Also, equity work creates external dependence rather than building the entire organization capacity. And as I said before, it's disconnected from the core. The work is mainly in the place of DEI committees, competencies, equity officers, which all the research is coming out. We need a better, more integrated approach. And it's separate methodologies. We bring in Annice to do the diversity training. We bring in another organization to look at our HR policies. And you're walking around with 3 different schools of thought. So how can conscious leadership help us think about advancing equity? Again, very similar when you look at this model, but what's the difference? Number 4 is the difference. It's really, you ask yourself, do I want to use my power to advance equity, Or do I want to use my power to stifle equity? It's a question. Raising your consciousness, shaping your mindset. The advancement of equity requires a level of trust and love. It's seeing yourself as enough. It's honoring yourself and others. But the key thing is number 4. You see the world as abundant. There's a lot of resources. There's a lot of opportunity for everybody in the world. It's an abundance mindset versus a taking away from or a lack mindset. When your mindset is open from a place of abundance, that's going to channel emotions of peace. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, which can lead to behaviors that's going to prompt bravery and challenge the status quo. If I trust myself, believe that I am enough in the moment, I also want to not only instill love to myself, but also advance equity, which in an essence is giving love to those around me. When you look at it from a fear and doubt perspective, how does fear and doubt thinking stifle equity? When you choose your power to operate in fear and doubt, I can tell you out the gate, it's going to be creating a mindset of lack, of deficit. Think about when people do acts that are based in equity, when someone does an individual act, it's usually because they're fearing a difference. Think about it from a cultural lens. They're usually fearing difference. Think about it from a cultural, a systemic lens. There's a fear of difference, fear of the other. You're not like me. This is different. I want my value to be the value. When you think about it in those big 8 groups, racism, sexism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, it's fear-driven. And a lot of time when you get behind the mindset, it's fear-driven because what's driving a lot of that fear is a lack mentality. You're going to take something away from me. There's not enough. There's a deficit. Creating that self-torment. You're seeing the world from a deficit lens. And what often happens when you think about people that stifle inequity or behaviors or actions that stifle inequity? There's resentment in the emotional behavior of those folks. Think about it in yourself if you've been on the other side of the coin. And what does that usually prompt? Divisive behaviors that maintain the status quo, which is keeping us in the lower version of ourselves. So I know I kind of breezed through that, but what I wanted to be able to show you is that us advancing equity, yes, it's complex. Yes, we have to talk about the different levels of oppression and how this shows up in the workplace. I do that work when I work with organizations. I'll talk about that later. But out the gate, on the basic premise that we all have power and choice in every situation, we can drill it down in this one micro moment. Even if I don't have the full dictionary of what all of these diversity terms mean, that process, people fear they don't have that, then what often happens is then people won't use their power or choice in the situation. They'll make it the diversity officer's job. They'll make it the diversity committee's job versus seeing their power and choice in that micro moment. So how does this look in practice? I'm going to give you 2 examples. I'm going to give you the example of the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education just created an equity fellowship for aspiring superintendents of color. So we'll go back into what I said. In order to achieve equity, you have to do some things that are unequal in order to achieve equity. I actually talk about this in an article that I wrote on LinkedIn. So those folks who developed that program came from a place of trust. I'm trusting that this is the best solution that we need to ensure that our superintendents match their community demographics. This is the best solution in the moment. I'm trusting that we have everything that we need to complete this program. This is the best solution in the moment. I also have a love for our community in ensuring that we bring an environment where people have folks that look like them. They can learn and grow and understand the complexities of those communities. Now, some people will think of that as, hey, you're doing something unequal to get equity. But that's if you're operating from a place of fear and doubt, which is this is going to take positions away from, versus seeing it as an abundance. This is creating more people, more candidates in the pool so that we can select people that are the best fit for these areas, and we're not leaving anybody behind. That was their choice, to use their power in that particular situation from a place of trust and love to advance equity. They slowed down. They thought about, and I know the folks who are behind developing this and the people that are implementing it, they thought a lot about what the implications were for the state. They thought about the implications for the districts. They spent a lot of time in the self-awareness piece. But then that allowed them to be very thoughtful with how they rolled out the policy, the conversations that they had with folks about this, and how to move this work along, and how to really view this from a place of abundance and bringing more people to the table. Are there people that are still frustrated? Yes. That's just the nature when you're exercising leadership. You're not going to please everybody. But they heard all the voices. What does this look like from a standpoint of interrupting cultural bias at your office? You know, you want to speak up about the chatter that you hear about people saying that your Black colleague is being described as aggressive. You realize, hey, this is cultural bias. You know, what is aggressive? Why are they using this to describe, you know, your colleague? You're feeling some dissonance about it. You don't think it's right. It's not connecting with you. So how do you operate at this from a place of trust and love? You ask yourself a choice. Do I want to use my power in this situation to advance equity? Yeah, I do. I don't think this is right. I want to interrupt this. I've learned that this is not right. I want to help people raise their awareness that, you know, when you speak like this, that you're actually creating an unhealthy work environment. So that's how you're choosing your power. You're slowing down, creating a level of presence. So what's actually going on in the situation? Who do you want to speak to? Who's actually creating the office chatter? How do you want to speak to them? What do you know about that person's personality and how they receive feedback? What do you know about that person? If you know them to be a person that's about fairness and justice. I'll say this quickly. Oftentimes people get nervous about speaking up. One thing I would say is that, again, most people I believe in the world aren't trying to do the things that they do. And oftentimes when I'm having a conversation with someone around interrupting, you know, bias, you know, I often say to the person, you know, Janet, I heard you make this comment, and, you know, I want to learn more about where that came from, because, you know, it kind of took me by surprise. I'm seeking to learn more, because it felt like there were some undertones of some bias, again, describing Black people as aggressive, and I know you to be the type of person to be fair and, you know, just, and so I'm just seeking to learn more. You're approaching that person, stating what happened, you're speaking the truth, you're talking about the behavior and the impact of it, but you're also seeking to learn what was behind it, but you're also raising a red flag that comment made you uncomfortable. We don't have to always jump down somebody's throat when we are interrupting a comment. And I actually have some videos on my website that talk about how can you interrupt these conversations. So I want you to know that what you experience today is a part of a larger framework that I am moving fully into practice with organizations. And it's really us coming in to help organizations transform their ecosystems by developing their people, their policies, and their processes. So you just experience a part of the people part of it. We go deep in with organizations. We talk about the different terminology. We talk about how to use your power. We talk about what does it look like in the workplace when bias is there, when it isn't there. We give some self-assessments, really help nurture and love people through the process. We challenge and support people through the process. Then we take your policies and processes. We believe there are 4 essential HR policies and processes that if you narrow in on those, look at them to see, we do a 2x3 equity assessment to see where you might be unintentionally having some policies that have bias both at the individual, cultural, and systemic level. We come in, we give you an assessment, we scrub it, and then we give you some recommendations on how to improve those. We do this because I'm not against equity competency, so let me be clear. I just believe that we need to first look at what organizations are already doing so that you're not adding equity competencies on top of policies and processes that are promoting inequity. I like to begin with seeing the strengths in an organization to see what you already do, and let us help look at those policies, help you do some improvement around those areas. And then from there, we can then look at, do you need something extra that says equity? I would say, why do you need something extra that says equity when we can just fully integrate it into the fabric of your organization? Because these 3 bullets are the 3 most important parts of an organization. So you can email me if you want to talk more about that. I don't want to spend too much time on that because I want to get your questions. So I've said a lot. I'm very passionate about this, if you can't tell. But there's some just basic things I want to leave you in summary with. 1, leadership is a way of life. It's a way of life. It's not a one-time act. You have power and choice in every situation. It is up to us to decide to use them. You can ask yourself, do you want to use your power to trust yourself and instill love? That's going to bring in the entire left side of that document that I talked about. It's going to lead you to the highest version of yourself. The universal goal of all of us is to live our best life, right? That's what we talk about. Trust and love will get you there. Or do you want to doubt yourself and instill fear? Do you want to keep yourself in this lower version of self, constantly doubting yourself, living in life of regret, not using your power? I don't want you to live that way. Yes, we all experience fear and doubt, but I want you to know you have choice. You don't have to sit in it. You don't have to go down that pathway. And you know what? Sometimes we get it. Sometimes we're able to come in and we're able to flip the switch and turn on the trust and love in a moment. And sometimes the fear is really gripping us and we end up going down that pattern of fear and doubt. It happens to all of us. Okay, you learn from it. You reflect later that night and say, okay, this is what it was like when I allowed myself to go down the fear and doubt road. I don't want to do that anymore. Let me learn about why I did it, what prompted it, what about the context, so that next time I can operate in trust and love. This is all about having grace with yourself. We're trying to be more in trust and love most of the time, but we're not perfect. We're always, we're humans. And if you can think about these 4 practices, it can support your daily consciousness. That you have the choice, asking yourself the question, how do you want to use your power? Trust and love, fear, doubt. You want to use it to advance equity? Do you want to use it to stifle it? Slows you down, creates a level of presence. What's going on in me? What's going on in the present moment? Keeps you from fixating on, the past or making up things that are not going to happen in the future. That then is creating a level of self-awareness. What's going on in you? Checking in with yourself, what's going on with other people, allows you to be more intentional. You can do those 4 things within 90 seconds in your head. How do I want to use it? What's going on with me? What's happening around me? Intentionality. Some people say, well, how do I slow down a room? Or what if someone's asking me a question? I know what to do, Annice. And I always tell people, ask for a moment. I need a moment to think about this. Can you give me a second? Thank you, Tom. That was a very good point. I need a moment because I want to make sure I'm being thoughtful in my response to you. Those are all ways that you can use your power and your choice to slow down yourself in the moment to build some consciousness.